Paul, how important was it in a political sense for Scott Morrison, that four-stage plan, the roadmap through COVID?
I think it was an absolute imperative for Scott Morrison to produce this roadmap at the end of the week. His authority as Prime Minister was really being damaged as a result of the behaviour of the Premiers last week. It was important to show the National Cabinet is still functioning, and I think the public needed to see these guidelines. When you look back on last week, I think it was fairly clear any sense of national unity and national uniformity in response to the virus was being torn up. Now, Scott Morrison had to make a major concession to the Premiers because international arrivals have been cut by 50%. That's a big decision. The Labor Premiers have driven this, and what it means is that our contact with the rest of the world is going to be reduced significantly, probably for the rest of this year. And that is a measure of the extent to which the Prime Minister had to bow to the Labor Premiers. It also reflects the two big mistakes that the federal government has made. That is, the vaccine rollout is too slow and there have been problems with the quarantine system. The big question now, we've got this national roadmap, is whether the Premiers adhere to it, spirit of it. And frankly, you would have very little confidence about this because the story of the vaccine to this stage is the Premiers are going to call the shots. They're going to do it.
This roadmap needs goodwill, and I think there's a very major question mark about the extent of goodwill surrounding it.
And what does the plan mean, though, in the detail? What's in it?
Well, it's a four-stage plan, and essentially it's designed to take us from the current phase, which is suppression of the virus, to the stage where we treat the virus just as an ordinary flu problem. So that's a very significant transition. But there's no timetable for the transition. Everything depends on the recommendations of this scientific medical committee, which will decide on the percentage of the population that's vaccinated that is required to move from one phase to the next phase. So in other words, the critical decision is outsourced to this scientific committee. And one of the issues here, of course, is, okay, well, what will their attitude be? Will it be 50%? Will it be 60%, 65%, 80%? We'll have to wait and see. But that's clearly going to be a critical decision. And the risk is that they're too conservative, just as the medical committee was too conservative several weeks ago about AstraZeneca. Now, if we actually look at lockdowns are permitted in phase 1 and 2. And phase 1 and 2 are going to last until the federal election. So I'm not predicting this, but I'm just pointing out that the potential exists for premiers, if there are outbreaks, to engage in lockdowns closer to the federal election or even conceivably during a federal election campaign. The critical phase is phase 3. In phase 3, that's when lockdowns are banned. That's when people who are vaccinated have complete free access. But we won't get to stage 3 for quite some time yet. So the point to make here is that it's going to be a long while yet before we get to a degree of community freedom in this country, and there are a lot of question marks and qualifications about the roadmap.
Paul, was this week a turning point, do you think, in how assertive the premiers are in relation to the federal government?
It was, I think. Look, we saw the premiers engage in lockdowns. I won't say whether they're justified or not, but the fact of the matter is decisions taken by the premiers meant that 12 million Australians were in lockdown. Now, I think you've got to look at the New South Wales Premier separate from the others because she faced a more severe problem. But clearly, we also saw the Labor Premiers flexing their muscles when it came to inbound arrivals. Now, we know there's blame shifting. We know the politics of the virus involves blame shifting. But what we saw from Queensland this week was something different. From the Queensland Premier Annastacia Palaszczuk, and incredibly, from the Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Jeanette Young. Now, what Scott Morrison said this week was consistent with the medical advice. He said, if you want to be vaccinated with AstraZeneca, talk to your GP. The Queenslanders accused him of putting the lives of young Australians at risk. Well, how can you be putting your life at risk if you go and talk to your GP? What they said about the United Kingdom, their claim that the United Kingdom had banned AstraZeneca to people under 40 was completely and utterly wrong. So what we saw from the Premier and the Chief Medical Officer was a degree of recklessness and irresponsibility and false claims, which went way beyond blame sharing. And this went to sabotage of the vaccination program. I think what we need in future is premiers to at least impose some sense of limitations on the extent to which they engage in blame-sharing politics.
Paul, almost out of time, but on the overall issue, everything underpinning this issue and the government's response comes back to the vaccination rollout, doesn't it?
It does, and let's look at the numbers. At the moment, we've had 6.3 million Australians get the first jab. That's 30%. We've had 1.8 million Australians get the second jab. That's about 9%. The rate of vaccination has significantly increased in the last week, but it needs to go higher. Now, the good thing about the roadmap is the roadmap makes it clear that people who are vaccinated get rewarded in terms of fewer restrictions. So there's a nexus there. More vaccination means more freedom. And that message has got to come out for the rest of this year to encourage the maximum degree of vaccination in the community. We've got to do a lot better.
Absolutely.
And at the end of the day, the fundamental question is, both Scott Morrison and Greg Hunt say, all those who want to be vaccinated will be vaccinated by the end of the year. Well, that's okay. The question is, what's the percentage going to be? It needs to be a high percentage.
Yeah, it certainly does. Paul Kelly, I appreciate it. Talk to you soon.
Thanks, Karen.